welcome back to the From Mourning to Meaning interview series, where we are learning how to break through intolerable grief and return to meaningful living. Today I have with me Nesreen Ahmed. Nesreen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today.
Of course. Now, for those of you that don't know Nesreen, not only is she a founder and CEO of the Harbor Light Coaching Company, but she is also a pioneer in the world of grief, loss, and change. So she is committed to providing transformational coaching to clients around the world. Thank you so much for that. Now,
Thank you.
Nazreen, I know you have suffered many losses throughout your life, and clearly all this has amounted up to bring you to where you are today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and what brought you to grief coaching?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So my story really begins when my sister passed away suddenly. This is now back in 2013 at the end of the year. And, it's just, I got a random phone call on the Saturday saying she had died. And I was overwhelmed. I was shocked. Like my heart stopped. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I didn't understand how this was possible. So it took me a long time to even, understand and wrap my head around what was happening. But I had not really a lot of experience, when it came to losing somebody, especially so close to me. I'd lost some relatives, I'd lost a lot of friends, but really like losing my sister was like one of my core people, and I didn't know how to deal with it, and at that point I was living in San Francisco where she passed away. And so I was like, I need to get out of here. I can't live in this city anymore. I can't be in this place anymore. So I moved back to New York, and most of my friends were there. I had my family on the East Coast. So it made more sense to be in New York, but I was just like, I just need to escape, right? Any form of escape that I could. And I started doing all the things that, people tell you you're supposed to do, right? So I was going to therapy, I was doing support groups, I was trying to like figure out, how to breathe again. And all of it was helpful to a certain extent, right? Like it got me to a level. And then it was kind of like, that's where I stayed. And I thought, I guess this is the best that it's going to get, right? Like, I don't know if there's anything beyond this. But I had already started at that point. I had already started I started training to become a life and business coach. And it was in that year-long training that I found out about grief coaching, right? Somebody actually just mentioned it when I was talking to her about how I was feeling. She was like, I just talked to a grief coach recently. I just was introduced to one. And I was like, wait, what? What is grief coaching? What is this thing? I've never heard of it. And I've done so much research. I'd gone to acupuncture, I tried Reiki and tapping. I saw a shaman, I was trying to find anything and everything that I could do to help myself. And suddenly it was like, here's this thing, like, in coaching, I was getting a lot of new information. I was learning a lot. I was really resonating with it. And I was like, maybe grief coaching will resonate, right? Maybe it'll help. And so eventually, I'm not gonna lie, it took a while to call the grief coach and even longer to actually like open that door and actually work with her. But I'm just so glad I did. It was huge for me to be able to process my grief differently. Like I started to talk to her about all the things that I wished were different or more or better in our relationship, all the things that felt like they were missing, and things that I could never say again to my sister or never said, and I wish I did. There was a lot of healing in that conversation or in those sessions. And once I was done, I was like, I feel this sense of peace and acceptance that I never imagined possible. I was like, this is unreal. Like, like how did this happen? And I wanted everyone to feel that way. I wanted people to understand that there are, more things that you can do for yourself beyond sort of the traditional grief work, right? And there are things that you can really, things that are available to help you really process differently. And now I think about my sister and I can laugh and I can smile and I can miss her and it can hurt, but I don't have to beat myself up. I don't have to feel the pain of the things that I did or didn't do, or the things that she did or didn't do. It was such a relief and a weight lifted off my shoulders. And so I knew that this was my purpose in life. I knew that this was my passion. I knew that this is what I wanted to be my profession, And so I actually went back to San Francisco to get trained in the grief coaching program. And since then, I never looked back.
That's awesome. It's really hard because I think when we lose a sibling, that's like your best friend. And I don't think people, unless you have a sibling, you don't realize the connection in that. It's really hard to understand that that's basically your person. So it's only normal that when you lose that, you're lost basically. And it's true that there's so many things out there that we can try, and so many different things that some people might not know where to start, and some people like you might not want to start in the coaching. I mean,
Yeah.
they might see something like, I don't know, but it's all a matter of trying, right? Seeing what works for you. And it's such a great step that you did take coaching, and it changed your life so much that it evolved to what it is today, right? So that's
Thank you.
awesome.
Yeah. I'm grateful. And you know, very often, like, my relationship with my sister wasn't always perfect, right? But
Yeah.
you know, just having one of those core people, like my immediate family, gone, you know,
Yeah.
and they actually they call the sibling the forgotten griever, right? Because we always understand what the parents going through. We always understand what the spouse is going through. We don't always think about the sibling, right? And so yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about helping any and everyone through grief, but when it comes to sibling loss, that's the closest to my heart.
Yeah, of course. I can understand that. Now, let me ask you, because I know we're always saying we need to recover from grief, and there's a lot of different ways that people see this idea. What do
Mhm.
you think it means to recover from grief?
So I talk about resolving your grief, and that leads to recovering from your grief, right? Because it feels like, again, there's so much unfinished within the relationship. There are all these things that we expected that were going to happen that now aren't,
Mhm.
right? There's a finality in death that hits us in a way different than any other type of grief. And, you know, it can get really complicated and really messy and really hard when you don't resolve your grief, when you
Yeah.
don't actually, again, kind of go through the things that you wish were different, when you don't forgive yourself, when you don't forgive the other person, you know, when you're holding on to so many different stories and so many different memories and so many different things that are causing you turmoil on top of the grief of just missing your person, on top of the sadness, the anger, you know, the just wanting to be with them, you know. And
Yeah.
so I think there really needs to be a conversation about how to resolve a lot of those things so that we can start to recover, we can start to heal, we can start to think about the good times, not just the bad, right? We can start to forgive ourselves and forgive the other person for the way things went and find peace within that, right? Like, you know, so often we have these stories in our head of like, I should have just done this, or I wish I had
Yeah.
just done that. And we can't go back and change it, right? We can't do anything differently. But what we can do is beat ourselves up. What we can do is judge this, you know, crap out of ourselves. What we can do is hate on ourselves for years afterward, you know. And I really want people to understand that it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember you had told me that guilt, anger, sadness, regret, all these are such big emotions. They're the biggest emotions, but we can't change them. There's nothing we can change of them. Um,
Mhm.
so that kind of adds on to what you were saying. We can't change what we didn't do or what we did do, but we can see kind of change the way we see it as well. No?
Absolutely. I mean, really, so much of the work that I do is about your mindset, right? As a coach, I want to bring mindset into the world of grief. You know, we
Yeah.
don't talk about it very much. We don't. It's a really sensitive subject, grief in general, and it's so personal, and so many different, you know, possibilities of how you're going to respond, how you're going to, you know, react to your grief, how grief is going to feel for you, right? And so it can be really tricky to kind of bring in that mindset work, but I'm really committed to it because I really believe that's where the relief comes from, right? Really understanding that, again, you're human, you're going to make mistakes. Your person was human, they're going to make mistakes, right? Like, or they did make mistakes. You know, there's so many different things that didn't go the way we wanted to, or we didn't show up, we didn't say, we didn't do. And when we're in that mindset, then everything's wrong, nothing's okay. We can never be okay with this. We're always going to, you know, beat ourselves up. We're always going to feel so shameful for what we did. And that's the world we live in, right? That's the reality we create
Yeah.
for ourselves. And our mind will never stop making those stories real. And what I really want people to do is to take a step back, right? We are more than just that, you know, that voice in our head. We are more than just our judge. You know, we are complex, wonderful, beautiful, incredible, inspirational people, right? We are a being beyond our emotions. And so I really want people to understand that there are things they can do. And the first step, I really believe, is just noticing, okay, I've got all these things going on in my head, and not all of them are true. Not all of them are factual, right? They feel true, and we could point to all these different reasons why they're probably true, or they feel true, or they should be true, but they're not actually factual, right?
Yeah.
Like I think I shared with you, there were relationship issues with my sister, and there were times where, I wasn't who I wanted to be with her. I wasn't as compassionate with her as I wanted to be.
Mhm.
And that weighs on me still, and I still feel like, ooh, when I really let myself feel that, when I let it in, it's like, yeah, there's regret, but there's not the beat up. Why? Because I've understood over time with a lot of work that I'm human. You know what I mean? I did what I did with the limited knowledge that I had. And now that I know more and I know better, I'm going to do better, right? I'm not going to do that with other people in my life. I'm not going to, judge them so harshly. I'm not going to require so much of them for them to be in my life, right? I'm going to allow for them to be their own human, their own, complex individual who may or may not be able to support me or be in my life at every, possible moment. So yeah, I think we really have to remember that that voice is telling us, we should have done this, we should have done that. But even if you did do that, even if if you had done it, the other person may not have responded, right? They may not have responded the way that you think. And so you're beating yourself up over something you can't change and over something that you don't know would have actually made a difference. You think you know, but you don't know if it would have made a difference.
True.
And so I really want people just to like, ooh, take a step back and start to recognize the voice in their head, even though it seems like it's our friend, it's actually really, really damaging, and it's hindering us from actually recovering, right? Like we said earlier, recovering from our grief.
Yeah, definitely. So it's true that we have to sit back and actually listen to it, because sometimes we don't even notice that we're doing it, right? It's there. We know we feel the guilt, but we don't realize we're putting it on ourselves. We don't realize that we're basically sabotaging ourselves with all these thoughts and emotions. But so it's true, we have to sit there, we have to really understand that we're doing it. But what would you suggest would be a way to kind of change that? Like, what can we do to actively know, okay, this is what I'm doing, and instead I'm going to do this? Or
Mhm.
how can we go
Mhm.
about that?
Mhm. So there's a lot of different ways. I would always say the first step is awareness, right? Like you said, we don't know we're doing it. So we can't change what we don't know, right? We don't know we're doing it, we can't stop it. So the first step is just understanding this, right? And I get that, like, where you are in your grief, and depending on how you're going through grief in general, you're going to hear this differently, right? Like, this may not land for all of your listeners, and I totally appreciate that. But I really want people to, just be open to it, take what you can from this, because you might be in a stage of grief where the idea of questioning your thoughts or noticing your thoughts and your emotions might be too much, right? And that's okay. But I really think, again, the first step is awareness, is understanding we have this voice in our head, and it's judging us all the time, and it's judging other people all the time, and it's judging our circumstances all the time, right? And maybe that's just the first step. It's just knowing that. And then the second step is like, okay, what does my voice sound like? What is my voice saying? Is it talking more about the other person? Is it talking about me, right? Is it talking about what I did or what I didn't do? Is it talking about what I said or didn't say? Is it talking about, that moment or that one situation, or is it talking about the whole situation, right? So like really starting to get curious and notice what your voice sounds like, what is it saying, and then from there, the next step is like, okay, how do I turn down the volume, right? Because these sabotaging ways that we have, right, they're not going to go away, right? You're always going to have an inclination to judge yourself or other people. That's just being human, right? And when you're not grieving, you're in the middle of doing that. So of course you're going to do it even more when you're grieving. But so how do we turn down the volume instead of trying to get rid of it altogether? Because if it's not going to go away, then how can we learn to be with it? How can we learn to integrate it? How can we learn to turn the volume down and have another voice that talks to us that's a little louder, right? And that voice is what I call your essence, your sage, your core, your higher self, whatever you want to call it. But there's a other part of you that you're not super connected with right now, but she or he knows, he or she understands, right? There's a wisdom, and there's a compassion, there's a sort of deeper understanding about life, about humanity, that you can start to access, right? And that's a lot of what I do with people, is help them start to access that, is help them start to connect to that. So it's definitely a long process. It's not something I wish that I could,
Of
like,
course.
share today, do this and you'll be there.
Of course.
But it's a process, and it's a starting of the conversation, right? So start to get curious about that other voice, right? It's not your judge, it's not your saboteurs, it's not how you normally do things. It's a deeper intuition and wisdom. And what does that voice have to say to you? Start there.
Definitely. So listen to ourselves, which is sometimes the hardest thing we really got to get to doing.
Absolutely. It's practice. I always say it's practice, one step at a time, 5% more, 10% more. You're building muscles, you're building mental muscles, you're building resiliency, you're building all these new skills. It's going to take time, right? Just like, I'm watching my 1-year-old daughter learn how to walk. It takes time. She's gotten so much better than she started. The first couple of days, she was like, boom, you know what I mean? We're going to be like that too, right? We're going to like try this and it didn't work, right? And then how do we try again? And how do we try again? How do we try again? And start to like expand our ability and our skills.
So does this actually get easier, the being able to hear ourselves negatively speak about ourselves or negatively judge a moment? Does that get easier with time, where it becomes more fluent and we can stop ourselves prior to doing it? Or is it never that easy? It just, we learn to see it.
I believe it gets easier with work. If you're doing the work over time, it'll get easier with time, but it really gets easier with the effort and the work and I talk about healing as a proactive process, right? If you break your leg, you're not going to not go to the doctor, right? If you have surgery and you need physical therapy afterward, you're going to do the exercises. You got to show up and actually do the work, right? And it's the same thing here, right? It's the same thing in grief. You got to show up and do the work, be proactive. So it will get easier with the work, with the practice, with the understanding of how to do it again and again and again, right? But just saying, okay, I'm going to do this and it'll get better, that alone isn't really going to be sufficient, right? You really got to show up and be committed to it. And it takes a while to get that point, right? Like not everybody, again, who's listening to this is going to be like, yeah, that's what I need to do, right? Some people just need to keep processing. Some people just need to be in their grief for a while. And that's totally fine, but I really work with people when they're ready, to start having these conversations, when they're ready to start thinking about how do I change my relationship with my person and with my grief, you know what I mean? So that I can recover, so that I can start to feel better, so that I can live a life that feels more satisfying and more meaningful than it was before.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Now, I know that you said that it takes work, which is clear. I mean, how many people are out there grieving, and they've been grieving for years and years and still they feel just the same. So it's not just time, it's clearly work. So going back to something you said before, when you were looking to get help for your process, for your grieving process, I know you went to therapists, you went to counselors, and you went through a whole lot of different experiences until you got to coaching. So my question, before we get to something awesome, my question is, how do we know where we should go, like where we should point towards? How do we know if coaching is right for us? How do we know if therapy is right for us? How do we know if breathing, like how do we find that? Or is there not even a way to find out? You just got to test it.
Well, I always recommend testing, as a way to figure out what's going to work best for you. But I also actually created a grief assessment. So if your listeners want to go check that out, it's m2m.harborlightcoaching.com. And really what that is a series of questions that people can answer, because when you're trying to figure out who to go see, there's sort of three main avenues when it comes to grief, right? It's either seeing a therapist, seeing a counselor, or seeing a coach. And each therapy or each mode of healing offers different things. So very often, if you're really in complicated grief where you're really struggling just to make it through your day, the basic things are too hard for you, right? Or if there's a lot of issues that came up in your grief or in your loss, in the person that you're with, the relationship, like there's a lot of complex things going on, that's when you should see a therapist, right? Because they're the best trained, and a therapist who's trained in grief, because not all are. But they're best trained to support you, right? They're going to really be able to help you uncover and go deep into the complex issues that you're facing right now. A lot of people, they just need help with their immediate loss, right? They've gone through a loss. They just want to learn how to walk, right? They just want to learn how to walk through their day. And that's a really great time to see a counselor, right? The counselor is going to be able to give you tools and resources and really help you start to work through some of the things because you've just had a loss and you don't know how to deal with it at all, right? And then a coach, like I said earlier, is going to be able to help you process, but also look forward. What's next? How do I, again, start to shift some of these things that I've been letting be true, right? And using against myself. How do I start to use different tools, different mindset work so that I can start to shift that? So there are definite differences, and that's why I created the assessment, is so that people could really get a general sense, right? It's not prescriptive. It's not like this is what you absolutely need, right? But it's a way to start. And then from there, start seeing a couple therapists. If that's the right avenue for you, see a couple therapists who feels right, who listens, who understands, who gives you that space, right, to really process. If you feel uncomfortable, or if they say the wrong things all the time, you're not in the right relationship, right? You need to see someone else. But at least, having that hopefully as a foundation will help people. And then from there, there's so many other things that we can do, right? Like I can talk about acupuncture, Reiki. I actually know there's somebody that's offering grief yoga right now, and it's a way to really kind of process and be in your body when you're grieving. And I think that's beautiful. There's so many different resources. I actually worked with somebody who offers havening, which I'd never heard of, but have your listeners check out havening, right? EMDR can be, especially if you have a traumatic loss, EMDR can be really helpful. So many different resources, especially now when, so many of us are going through grief and loss. Check out different things, do some exploration, try it once, twice, see if it feels right. If it doesn't, move on. There's plenty of other things to try. But so it's kind of a mix. Like I want to give you a starting point, but then I also want to encourage you to try different things and see what really lands for you, because it's going to be different than anybody else.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome, which is why I said we'll get to some awesomeness. I think it's awesome because it's like you said, there's so many different things we can do, and our grief process is already so different, but we're also in different stages, if you can say stages, but there's different things that we need at every moment, right? And sometimes someone might try something and it might not be for them, so they automatically think nothing will work for them. But that's not always the case. Sometimes we're just going to the wrong thing, for us at least. Or sometimes it's not the wrong thing, but it's the wrong person. That person's just not a fit for us. So I think that assessment that you have provided is great, because it's a starting point to say, okay, where can I start looking? Where can I start trying first? And guys, I'm definitely going to be providing you guys that link, because I do think it's awesome, and you guys are going to really get a good idea of where to start. Not that you might end there, but where to start, so you can start your journey on recovering from grief, like we mentioned before, right? So that's awesome. Would you like to, I think you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, I also do healing circles. I co-host Healing Circle every Tuesday. And so depending on where people are and what they need, they can also check that out on my website and see if that's a resource for them. Because I really believe that community and coming together, with people who really understand what it means to hold space and to support is so critical. So we all isolate and we close ourselves off from people way too often when we're grieving, because either, again, they don't feel safe, or they say the wrong things, or we just feel so raw and vulnerable, and it can be really hard to like reach out and be in a room full of people, right? So we do it virtually, but it's a Zoom room full of people who are on their own journey, on their own path, but looking for tools, looking for inspiration, and looking for connection. So that's definitely something that if your listeners are interested in or curious about, they can reach out and check out more information on the website.
Perfect, guys. So that's another opportunity that's really great for you guys. So when you guys are ready, obviously not everyone's ready yet, but when you're ready to put in work to really start trying to recover from that grief, there's many things we can do right now. We can see where to start, we can test, and we can actually go out and reach out to some support groups, which will help, because again, it's true. A lot of people do isolate themselves when they're going through this process, and that's probably the worst thing you can do, because you're only going to feel more and more alone. But there are people out there that are going through similar situations. We're not going to say the same, because everyone's is different, but similar situations that can understand a bit of what you're feeling, and can just be there to listen, basically. Also, it doesn't need to be that they have every answer, but they're there to listen and they want to listen.
Yeah.
So that's perfect. Thank you so much for offering that. I'm sure it's going to be greatly appreciated by everyone watching. And before we go, I know that when I ask you this, you're going to say so many, but if you could only give one thing for everyone watching today to leave with, just one thing, I know there's a bunch, but one thing, what would it be?
Self-compassion. Self-compassion above all. Like I said, that judge is constantly on when we're not grieving, and it's, on 30 or 40 when we are grieving. And as much as you can, be kind to yourself, give to yourself, whether that's space, whether that's time, whether that's, people, whatever it is that you need to really just be kind to yourself and try to understand this process. Grieving often happens to us. It's not something we can necessarily control. And so as much as you can, try to ride the waves and get the right kind of support. But that really starts with just allowing yourself to be where you are, allowing yourself to grieve how you're going to grieve, and not judging it, not, requiring more of yourself. I think if you can be gentle and give yourself a lot of grace right now, you're already, halfway there.
Awesome. Yes, I love that. So self-care, guys, self-care. Awesome. Thank you, Nesreen, so much for joining us. I really appreciate not only the advice and the experience, your experience, personal experience that you've shared with us, but all the little tips and how to look where and how to test things out. So I really appreciate that, and I'm sure everyone else does. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. I appreciate it.
Awesome. And thank you guys for watching in. This was another interview in the From Morning to Meaning interview series. Catch us again tomorrow for another one. Bye, guys.